I'm curious, Mark or Kathryn, how did you find this story, or did this story find you?
In the 60s, this was actually a pretty prominent story. Obviously, 67, you have the rebellion in Detroit and then also in Newark. But over the course of 50 years, it was largely forgotten. And somebody in my production company named Hugo Lindgren told me about the story, and it was one of many things we were looking at, but what really turned it into a screenplay was I went up to Detroit in the end of 2014 and met with two people who kind of changed my life. One was Larry Reed, who Algee Smith plays, and I sat in his living room, and he hadn't talked about what happened to him that night in 50 years. At the time, his dad had told him never to talk about it. And it was the first of many conversations, but it was a very moving encounter for me. And then I also met Melvin Desmukes on the same trip, and that's who John Boyega plays. And Melvin is like a football player in his size. He's a giant guy. He's huge. And even though must be in his 70s, he's still really, anyway, big dude sitting in his dining room. And he just started crying as he was telling me this story of how he was kind of trapped between two worlds. So that's how it started, just from wanting to tell the stories of those people, and then the other themes that you mentioned. You cover the sort of civil rights and racial strife stuff kind of came after that, but it started with those people.
You're from one of those places that sees on a daily basis what happens in police departments. We're living 50 years later in a world where it's almost deja vu. Let's bring it home.
Well, my dad always said if you do the same thing, you're going to get the same results. And I think as a time and as a people, this movie is poignant and important because if you look at the diversity of the production team and you look at the diversity of the cast, and we were able to tell this story in a true, honest way, and no actors were hurt in the filming of this movie.
Speak for yourself.
So the reality of it is one bad apple shouldn't spoil the bunch. And you know, a movie like this, a story like this, is not pointing the finger at the awful nature of the police department. Is pointing the finger at the awful nature of the lack of humanity of a certain few. And those certain few aren't worthy of wearing that uniform and pinning on that badge.
Kathryn, you made this movie, or you say you've made this movie, and I believe you, because you want a discussion about race that has not been made here. Are people going to discuss it now? Is this the switch?
I certainly think there was a key motivator, because it was, when Mark and I first discussed it, was right around the time of the Ferguson, Missouri, when the decision not to indict the officer, and I found that the story was extremely moving, and it was 50 years ago, yet it was also today, and then, of course, potentially tomorrow. And I immediately thought this was an opportunity to certainly expose this inequity yet again, and shine a light. Maybe a little bit of light can go a long way. That was my hope.
This film has action, it has stillness, it has exhalation. How do you bring all that together as a filmmaker and the pacing of a film?
Well, I have an extraordinary crew. I mean, really, it's not, as everybody knows in this room, no one person makes a movie. and between an incredible cast, in my humble opinion, a phenomenal cinematographer in Barry Ackroyd, a phenomenal editor in William Goldenberg, and the opportunity to work with this extraordinary content and start with the macro, the lead up to rebellion in a very kind of a time that was in the midst of a perfect storm, which we're probably still in today, of course, and then begin to winnow it down to the human beings that are at the heart of it and humanize a situation that's extremely difficult for most people to understand or even to imagine. And then out of that, perhaps the potential for empathy, and out of empathy, there's awareness. And so, I think if the purpose of art is to agitate for change, then, this is kind of, the purpose of this piece.
What was your takeaway, John? How do we live with this as an audience?
That's a deep question that I don't have an answer to.
I mean, I was questioning. I was sitting there like, what do I do with this?
I mean, I think one thing about watching this movie is that it's one of those movies that are very unique in its time, because we are living in a time in which the content, in which the narrative exists today. And if you just take out the clothes from the 60s, a bit of the culture, and just 2017 it could have happened last week. In fact, it couldn't happen in London. We have serious issues now with Grenfell Tower, the fire in Grenfell Tower, with a recent black kid who was now wrestled to the floor and died 24 hours later, and it just reflects on our world in a very tragic way. But I do think it motivates a conversation that could lead to change, but it starts as an internal individual thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think earlier, you asked why we wanted to be involved in this project, and I think the potential to be part of a film that can initiate such a critical and much needed conversation, add to the progression and the good work that is being done, because there are people out there working hard to improve race relations, eliminate racially motivated police work. It's not as though nothing has been done at all, but if we are looking back at a film that is set 50 years ago and we are seeing a repetition of the same events in 2017, it's clear we're not doing enough. We cannot afford to have racist individuals operate in society, period. It's totally irresponsible to allow those individuals any sort of power, and it makes absolutely no sense to have them become a member of a community of people whose job it is to serve and protect a community of people. So that, I think, is something that motivated all of us to want to be involved in this film. And I must also say as well that that is something that Kathryn Bigelow does as an artist. She recognizes the importance of art leading to change and impacting society positively. And it's a call to all artists to do our bit as creatives to make sure that our work actually stands for something. Entertainment's great, but change that's where it's at.
Oftentimes those kinds of movies, though, aren't greenlit automatically. How do you get a movie like Detroit greenlit? Come on, girl.
I know a guy. No, actually, I know a woman.
Anyway,
Kathryn has a lot to do with that.
We had a conversation, and we're fortunate enough to be supported by Annapurna, Megan Ellison, who thought highly of this project, and we're very fortunate to have that kind of support and confidence in it.
She got behind it. That's an understatement.
Yes.
That doesn't happen very often, that someone comes along and drops that kind of money and single-handedly pushes it forward. What did you say to her?
I think she believed in the story, and she really genuinely believed in it. So that was the biggest motivator.
And can I add something to that, which I think a lot of people don't talk about it, and it just kills me in my face. Kathryn is a talented, educated, well-rounded, beautiful, white woman. And when you see that, you expect in this generation for people of that esteem to do movies about young, beautiful, white women, because that's all she can do. That's all she knows. That's the only story she can tell. But the reality of it is the cream always rises to the top. And if two beautiful, well-rounded, young white women get together and make this movie, who's to tell them that they can't do it? We're storytellers. We're artists. So why is it now if you make a movie about a young black dude from New Orleans, you only can direct it if you're a black dude from New Orleans? That's crazy. That's preposterous. You're putting limitations on your goals, dreams, and abilities and reasons for being in this business. We're storytellers. Tell stories.
Just to add a little bit, I surely don't know how projects get greenlit, so don't ask me. But I can say this, though. You say it doesn't happen a lot, and I just say that I feel like this project, there's just some stuff that's just so, people don't like to talk about this either, but they're so spiritual that you just can't put a finger on it. And it's like this project was bigger than any of us. And so I feel like there was no one person that honestly could stand in the way of this story being told. And I think it's because of the time of it and because of the souls that would be touched by it and the way people would feel coming away from it. Like, this project will do something then be more than a movie, you know what I'm saying? Like, people are already walking out of the theaters like, I don't have words. And that's a conversation started right there when you don't have words, and then we can finally sit down and say, okay, now what do we say? How do we move on from it?